Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up. My name is Morgan McLintic, and today I'm joined by Chris Ulbrich. Hey, Chris.
Hey there.
And Ian Lipner.
Hello.
So today we're talking about getting fired. We are going to talk about how agencies and their clients end their relationships. Now, this is a bit of a taboo topic, but obviously the relationships do come to an end and there's a way to handle it. And if you do understand why a client might terminate its relationship with an agency or an agency might terminate its relationship with a client, then you can understand that and you can look to avoid it where possible. So it's an emotional topic too, I think, because yes, this is a business relationship, and at one level you can sort of just see it coldly and commercially, but there's also a very personal relationship between the people working on any campaign that is built up, and people throw their hearts in and they're thinking about the programs over the weekend. So it can be quite an emotional topic. And so we thought, right, let's tackle this head on and just share some experiences about it. And I thought we would start with how clients typically maybe fire or just more commonly terminate a relationship with an agency, why that is, and then we'll talk a bit about the other side of the table. So, Chris, talk about the most sort of obvious then, like there's a specific breach. We're going on a campaign, something happens. I think it's rare, but that's the clearest cut, right?
When there is a complete and acute breakdown in the relationship due to some either misunderstanding or error on the agency's part or a relationship mismatch that comes to the breaking point. Although I think you were indicating a breakdown like that is sudden is fairly rare. If you look back, the signs were present for a while before you get to the final breaking point. I think that in general, as in any business relationship, ultimately most breakdowns come from a lack of perceived return on investment. As a business relationship, the agency needs to be delivering more value than it costs. And that value can take many forms. And the worst kind of breakdown is the kind that is sudden and apparently shocking or rancorous. But there are so many other reasons, not all of them bad, that an agency relationship can end. In some cases, like a project, the relationship has abounded. You come to the end of it and you hope to have, each side is satisfied with the results, and you part ways and hope to work with one another again. But in other times, you can have relationships where the campaign succeeds to such an extent that there's no need for the service anymore. Ultimately, as an agency, you're a problem solver, right? And when an agency relationship ends, it's because either the problem has gone away or the agency has failed to solve the problem in the eyes of the client. And within those two big categories, there's a whole range of experience and possibility. We've probably seen the full gamut in our careers.
I spent most of my career, and I'm still spending it trying to keep those client relationships going for as long as possible. But I also spent 4 years in crisis, where the goal is, just like you said, Chris, is for them not to be a client as soon as possible. So it's interesting, I think, the dynamic difference in those relationships. And yeah, it can be a lot more transactional when it comes to, hey, did you solve the problem or not in a crisis scenario? I haven't been on a team where we lost control so much that they moved it to another team or anything like that. But also, I think the onus on maintaining the health of the long-term relationship is more often placed on the agency. And we're more often there during sort of changes that are happening, whether they're in strategy or personnel. We often are there as continuity across that point. And they say that in every relationship, there is someone who is the adorer and someone who is the adored. And what's interesting about that is that the adored often feels less engaged in the relationship, right? Because they don't have to do anything and they don't have to put out of themselves in order to keep it going. Whereas the adorer has to continually create new goals, create new objectives, show that they're chasing, which is fun if you're an adorer type. I think most agency folks are adorer types. And so this comes with the territory. You've got to take more of the responsibility for the relationship's health.
I think that's really fair. And also equally, at some point, the adorer might switch that off if it's not well received. And so it might come as a surprise, but there are instances where agencies will fire their clients. It's rare, but it happens. The agency's made a mistake. Those instances are pretty clear cut. For example, I remember there was an issue with one public client that we had, and a press release just wasn't put on the wire at the right time. They had all their other marketing lined up around it. Normally, this is a task for someone fairly junior. It's a routinized task, and it didn't happen. And that's a clear breach. It's a clear mistake. It's understandable, but not necessarily forgivable. And that caused a real rupture, right? So that relationship in this instance didn't end, but could easily have just terminated right there for cause. It's an uncorrectable mistake. So those kind of things, it's awkward, but it's clear on both sides. There's been a breach here and we should just stop. And that's quite sad because you're normally going along quite well and the client is very happy and then something comes and it's sort of torn. That instance, rare, but easily handled. So that's sort of you're going along and then it's fine and then it's sudden. The other is the relationship gradually degrades. Clients normally have a process to select a great agency. Agencies normally also have a process to make sure that they can qualify their clients and that they will be a good fit. Both parties are aligned on that, right? We want this relationship to be good and we want to be able to deliver. Then things change. New contacts come on board. Maybe the agency's team changes. How many times as agency folks have we heard, well, my current agency had such terrible churn on their team, they can't fix it. I'm looking for a whole new team that's a bit more stable. Well, that's a problem for clients because you're constantly onboarding people. There's a bit of a brain drain and it's almost like having a new agency all the time because it's a revolving door. And really what you want is some consistency. On the flip side, we've had people come in on the client side who have a completely different ethos to the prior incumbent in what they want from their agency and what they want the program to look like. Maybe that's deliberate. The client wants to shake things up and radically change their strategy. Then you suddenly find yourself it's not a good fit. And so the relationship can degrade. Those ones are painful, right? Because that can happen at any point. And, it can be after years of great work with a company and then someone new comes in and changes things, or someone vital on the agency side leaves and you can never fill the gap properly.
I like to make a comparison to like sports here and the coaching leadership. I think about the NFL. I know that not every listener might be an NFL fan, but what you have in the NFL is that same idea. The moment you're hired, it starts ticking down toward the moment that you're going to leave. And even Bill Belichick was asked to leave eventually, right? So, I kind of see the agency is almost playing like a coordinator role. And to your point about the ethos and the style of communications, of marketing, different coaches want different kinds of teams, right? I happen to be from the Midwest and I want a big offensive line, a big defensive line. Those are most important to me first. Other folks are like, get your quarterback, get your skill positions in place first, right? Both of those are viable strategies, just like we might take a bottom-up strategy and really look at buyer needs first on some clients, or other clients want to go brand level down and look at the impression they're making on the entire audience as their primary kind of North Star. And your teams need to match up with that. And it isn't to say every team is characteristically only one, can pursue only one kind of philosophy. Just like in the football areas, offensive coordinators go or defensive coordinators go and change their schemes to match the personnel. So a good agency is able to do that prior to that, or even in the face of a new coach, if you will, go, hey, we know how to do that too. We can play the 4-3 defense. We need to bring in this additional linebacker here.
Proactively change up the team, bring in someone new and with new ideas.
Yeah. So it's a question of whether leaders are sort of clear the deck leaders and whether agencies are sort of one note teams, or whether you've got folks who are willing to see what you have to offer both ways. And I've been surprised at the number of, certainly there are times where it's just like, this isn't going to work. This is a different philosophy and personality match. But I've been surprised at how often you can demonstrate, hey, we can play that kind of game too as an agency. Or we've had folks who go, okay, I don't normally do it that way, but I'm willing to see how you guys do it. Show me how this goes this way in this strategy. So I've been in more situations where the agency lasts longer than the internal team. But I've also experienced high churn on teams that are more junior in particular, and had to be there and go, okay, say to the CMO, look, I understand your point of view on this, and I understand why you need to move on.
I often think about that parallel you drew with the football coach. I had to think about that too, because I think it sheds light also on the importance of trust in the relationship and the extent to which trust might depend to some extent on factors that are just a matter of chance or luck, which is to say, an agency like a football coach is calling plays all the time. And in selecting the play to call, the coach is making an assessment of what's the right move under these circumstances. But it's always a percentage play. And if you select the 75% play as the best compromise between yards you can gain and risk that you're taking and so on, if like 2 or 3 of those 75% plays fail, then the head coach starts to wonder, is my coordinator calling the right plays? And even if the coordinator has absolute faith that was the right move, the trust starts to take a hit. And you take enough hits like that, and the trust can just be irreparably damaged. And it's not exactly anyone's fault. It's just the fault of the way the dice rolled. But as in the NFL, there will be a change in the coaching staff because the stakes are so high that it may be the OC's fault. It may be just chance, but the head coach's job is also on the line. They feel like they can't take a chance, so they bring someone new in.
Yeah, and that's fair because obviously it is a partnership and good clients say, okay, what should we do? And we come up with a strategy and we come up with the plays, as you just said. And, you've got to take some risks. And sometimes it doesn't work out. But if you consistently do that, you're underperforming over time. And ultimately, a CMO is there to deliver their business goals. And however much they like you, your relationship can't sustain that. You've also got to have results. You've got to have a good relationship. You have good results. If you have a good relationship and no results, you don't retain that client. If you have good results and no relationship, equally, ultimately, it's not a fun experience and that doesn't retain. You've got to have both. And sometimes it doesn't pan out. We've all been there. If you do marketing for any period of time, you make your play and it doesn't work. And you try and learn from that for the next time. But that's the risk. In those instances, it's relatively straightforward, those conversations. You're like, okay, we were in this together, but it's time to change things up because for whatever reason, love you, but leaving. So that one is sort of sad, but happens. And interestingly, you often work with those people again, right? Because, okay, for that particular season, we made some plays together, it didn't work, but, things are different now, different company, different team, let's try again. Another reason is often changes in budget. And this is also fairly common. We thought we had the budget for this relationship. Something has changed. We have to make cuts. We thought we were going to close this big deal. It's been pushed out. Market's been asked to cut its budget by 25%. Saw a lot of efficiency last year, for example. We just can't afford this relationship anymore. Even if it was delivering good ROI, we need to step down a freelancer, take it back in-house. Sad, but that happens, right? And again, you can kind of carry on, pick it up again maybe later, but the campaigns need to go on pause for that reason.
Yeah, at times there's just not enough investment available to get an R that makes a difference.
Yeah, and that one's sad. You do see, again, outgrowing the capabilities of an agency. Now, this might depend on the size of the agency. If you've got a 2-person, 3-person firm, you're going to see a lot of companies grow and be successful. Your campaign was great, but hey, we just need more of it. And for an agency, it's a big risk if their one client is 40, 50% of their revenues. I've seen it when I was acquiring agencies, up to 75% of revenue and even more of profit was tied up in one company. That is a huge risk. And those companies obviously want a lot more from that firm, and they just outgrow the scale or even the skills. So as an agency, you've done a good job. This client has graduated and it's kind of, they've gone on to the biggest agencies in the world.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It's a victory because you've done the things to get them past that point. And then at the same time, some of the most exciting things that might happen for that company, the most easy to publicize things that might happen to the company will be handed off to another team. But I mean, that's the goal of any startup agency, at least, is to have all of our clients become publicly traded behemoths that we couldn't possibly service. My mom was an 8th grade teacher, and she said goodbye many times to students thinking, wow, we went through so many things together and this person's up for great things. And the best ones come back and they say hello. And in our business, we still have services to offer them when they're at new places. Whereas my mom can't keep offering them up science projects.
A little algebra refresher.
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. That's a good analogy. All right. So we've talked a little bit about why a client might end its relationship with an agency. There's obviously a breach or something irreparable has happened. There's a change of CMO or whatever, and therefore needs a different style of play that the agency can't provide, or they don't have the timeline to provide it if they could. Sort of slow degradation in the relationship as the sort of trust is eroded or whatever. You tried some plays and they just didn't work, and okay, let's cut bait and move on. Budget changes, or you've outgrown their capabilities. Or as Chris said at the beginning, hey, we've been successful. I think, Chris, you said even in one project, hey, the goal was to get leads. We've got so many leads now, we can't deal with them. There's no point in investing further in this. So we should just put it on pause.
Right. Mission accomplished. And there are also times when a client comes in thinking they have a certain kind of marketing problem. And then in the course of working with the agency, they realize that wasn't really the issue to begin with. A lot of startups in particular, when they get funding, will sort of rush to install a permanent PR retainer thinking, okay, now we're playing in the big leagues. We've got our Series B and we're going to need ongoing PR. And you very well might. But in a lot of cases, that decision is made sort of last minute, maybe not with a lot of thought as to what sort of infrastructure will be required to sustain the relationship, what the goals are going to be for the program. And so there are times when you see cases where those programs take root and thrive, and other cases where the institution realizes, we're not really ready for PR yet. We don't really have enough news coming out. Internally, our people are too focused on just solving the problems in front of them. They're not really, and I'm talking about media here, they're not really able to spend the time interacting with media or thinking about content. And so let's put a pin in this and come back to it when we're a bit more mature.
I would just, on that note, often when I have those first calls with clients, they say, okay, I'm looking for a PR agency. And this is the common discussion. I say, okay, but what are we trying to do? I need a PR agency because that's what a company at my stage has. And I need to spend $15,000 a month on this because that's what we do. And then if you have the conversation, all right, but what are we actually trying to solve here? Sometimes PR isn't the solution or not the only solution to get to that goal. So we often end up saying, okay, well, PR is part of this, but let's also have these other work streams in terms of paid media or content marketing or email marketing. Like there are other routes to goal. And actually, that's a better solution. You're actually solving the problem rather than just providing the service. And I much prefer that kind of engagement. Otherwise, you'll sort of engage on this PR program because I think I need a PR, as you said, PR agency. But is there enough to fuel it? And not always. And that can then just fizzle because the premise was wrong to start up with. And really, agencies should do a better job in filtering that and having that conversation up front rather than just taking the money and then 6 months later going, yeah, you're right, that didn't work. I think it's a bit of a cynical approach. But that is a different topic. Let's talk about why would an agency actually fire its client or terminate its relationship with a client? Because clearly, you don't want to be terminating your customers. You don't grow a business, and agencies are businesses. You don't grow if you say no. So what are the main reasons, Ian, why an agency might make that seemingly odd decision?
The reason it would come up first would be probably because the agency team is being abused on some level. It might be as small as just, wait, these expectations are way out of line in terms of deliverables for the tasks that we've agreed to. But it could go beyond that. I mean, you could have significant problems. You could have an unfortunate choice by a client executive to do something inappropriate to or with the team. You could have, a beasting of the team, just negativity constantly that makes the team feel unsuccessful, which leads to more lack of success, right? Because teams that are constantly bad dogged can't motivate themselves as easily in most cases these days, at least. Those are the times when good agency team leaders go, okay, hey, we need to have a commercial conversation about how much this client's impacting us, because the overall economic impact might be negative because we're going to lose people. We're going to have to retrain people. We could even have some sort of legal matter in the worst cases. And then hopefully on the best teams, hey, we don't want people feeling that way and talking that way, regardless of whether it is impacting, the financials in any way, right? Those things are usually sussed out pretty quickly if they're going to be a difficult client. Sometimes the workload creep, the scope creep, can slide you into that space without there being any inappropriate personalities, right? Where all of a sudden, hey, wait a second, we're doing 3 different versions of this report. We're spending more of our time talking about the work than being able to execute it. Or you get into these people they have the wrong strategy and tactics, and they're making us execute against a losing strategy, right? Which is a really hard conversation to get to. You have to know your stuff and really understand the problem before you can diagnose it like that as an agency leader, right? Hey, these people over there they're not gonna succeed, and they're making it impossible for any team to. I think those are the things that kind of are the main reason, but there are others. I don't want to eat up whatever else we want to talk about today, but I do think that the primary reason that I'm saying we need to fire this client is because we cannot do profitable, peaceful work together on it.
I come back to what you said about the effect on the team. I mean, all the incentives really for the agency are to find a solution. So there are strong disincentives to breaking an ongoing client relationship. Typically, in my experience, it does come down to a client relationship being so dysfunctional for whatever reason that the members of the team might be leaving the agency. I've seen that happen. And that the client becomes a retention problem for the agency, which then threatens other accounts. And so at that point, maintaining the relationship is a greater business risk for the agency than letting go of the retainer. It's a painful decision and a relatively rare one, but it does happen. And in my experience, it does tend to come down to the team.
Yeah. And it's not going to come as a surprise, or it should not. So, having done this before, you normally have a conversation with the highest person and say, look, here's the issue. You might not be aware of it, but this is an issue. And this is a relationship that needs to be successful on both sides. And we want this to be fun. You want your team to like working on your client, your campaign. You don't want to be the unpopular one where people feel they must do this work. It's purely transactional. You want them to bring their best ideas. You want to be the client that they're thinking about the weekend, as I said, right? You want to be that one, the fave client. You don't want to be, this person who's so demanding and disorganized and wasting our time, pursuing the wrong strategy and just difficult to work with. So normally you'll have a conversation. The agency top to top will say, look, this needs to be fixed. You may or may not be aware. But then if it doesn't, normally the agency will then make that decision to say, this is just bad business. And my competitor can work on this. I don't want to work on this. And we're done. Because the doing damage to our overall relationship, the relationship with reporters, maybe at staff retention. So find something else. It is rare, and it doesn't normally happen out the gate, right? Normally there's a change of staff because both sides have done their DD before they got into this relationship. So it can be solved, but it definitely does happen. And when we've done this, the team loves it because you've suddenly taken a weight off their shoulders, the thing they were losing sleepless nights about. I'm going to have to leave my job because I just can't support working on this anymore. It's terribly emotional when you, as an agency principal, step in and say, I see this and I value my team over this business relationship. We're going to step in and fix this. It's great. Okay, it's not commercially the best outcome, but you don't always get the choice around that. So, and there are other clients out there. So often you'll say no to this, and then the very next day, your phone rings or the email bings or your DMs pop up or whatever it is, and a new opportunity opens up, and it's fine. And I think that's a healthy thing, right? Because for both sides, this has to be a productive, profitable relationship where both can feel good about the investment that they're making.
You raise a good point about that first conversation, that cure conversation, which should happen on both sides. We didn't talk that much about whether or not you get that conversation from your client's side, which is, I think, less often than should be. But I think when you do stand up for your team, more of the time, the client listens than you would expect when you establish that boundary. And if they indicate that they don't care about that boundary, it certainly makes the next decision easier after you do give it some time. What I would say is that your team doesn't just appreciate not having to do that work or work on behalf of that person. They appreciate you standing up for them. I remember a time when we were putting out like a series of press releases for a company on product back in the days of like heavy product PR. And we set goals for the first one and we beat it by like a lot. And then the second one came up and we beat that by a little. And the client said, oh, well, last time seemed like a bigger success than this time. And I said, well, we've got even more coverage than last time and more than we expected. I think we're doing great. Yeah. Next time comes slightly even coverage. I'm just not seeing the lift here, guys. And I remember saying on the call, I'm like, this isn't going to go up and to the right more until you add more budget, Bob. And he was shocked at the pushback. My team was energized by it. We hung on to that account for another year because we established boundaries. And then that same kind of tone started creeping in. I said, Bob, if you're not happy with us, you got to make your decision. And in the meantime, in that previous year, I looked at all the competitors and I knew exactly who I would approach next. Because when you know that somebody is not earnestly trying to help you be more successful and is just treating you like, well, I want a little bit more, you have to be ready as an agency for what might come next. But you can't put your work down. You got to keep trying to make that graph go up and to the right.
That's a great example because obviously you can't just keep jumping higher and higher and higher. Once you're performing and doing really well, take the win and just keep going. But you do see some people with that sort of, this is a supplier relationship and I'm just going to squeeze you for as much as I can. And then I'm going to find the next one.
Well, there's also, I think, a common, I would say, misimpression that a successful campaign is always growing its results. It's that it's building on itself such that if it was just getting underway and you were getting 20 hits in a period, then it's reasonable to think it's going to be 30. And then from there, once you really get your feet under you, it's 60. And then it's just going to keep scaling. And, for one thing, as we know, it's harder to scale large numbers than small numbers. So it's at some point when you do reach scale, the percentage growth. And to Ian's point, you need investment at some point to scale more because the current results are coming from a team's time and the team only has a certain amount of time for the budget. And the team becomes more efficient over time. That does naturally happen in a client relationship. But at some point, you would need to invest more. And in some areas, though, there isn't much more to achieve by doing the same exact thing. I'm not saying there's not more to achieve in the whole program, but an NFL coach can't win 2 Super Bowls in a year. There are some arenas where you're naturally bounded by the number of reporters, the amount of news you have. When you find yourself bumping up against those limitations, it's time to think about other ways that you can, or other tactics or strategies that you can employ to make the program richer rather than trying to just do more with the same tactics you're already using.
So there's a good way to do this and a bad way. And I just want to wrap up here about the sort of the mechanism of ending a relationship is really important because this is a small industry. Memories are long. People are connected. You got to handle it well. And if it's handled well, I've worked with clients where it hasn't worked out one time and we've gone on another one and been rehired. And it's been great. Or even ones where we've finished, they thought they could get something better. They found another agency. The grass wasn't greener and we're rehired. Like this happens. So if you handle it well, you can maintain those relationships. But it can also be quite, because it's an emotional moment and it's also commercial and a lot of people are not used to handling that kind of thing. It can be stressful. What have you seen, Ian?
So there's lots of different ways that folks do it. I think the most gracious folks go, hey, we're not getting the lift that we're looking for from this program. Let's sit down. Let's talk about how we can do better. You've got more months to work after that, right? You give it a try. You change something. You change a person on the campaign. You change a strategy, something, right? And then they go, okay, it didn't work out. Here is the notice that we've signed up for according to the contract. And let's think about how we can spend the time best during that notice period. I mean, that's the right way to do it and the ideal way. Sometimes our contacts are constrained by forces that have nothing to do with politeness. We've experienced a range of other versions of that. Shorter cure periods, no cure period. Hey, here's your notice. Or even, can I please truncate the notice? Or I have no intention of paying out your notice. You have that full range, and it doesn't always track with results or the prior relationship. It can just be how that person is dealing with the directives that they're receiving and the resources they have and the pressures that they have. But I do think there's always room to let people know that you've appreciated their work. And if you feel that way, that you can see ways that you might be able to work together again. But I do feel that sort of grace has decreased over time as I've watched in my career. I think there is a belief that, hey, this is just business kind of thing that can creep in there. And that as our typical agency relationships have become more project-oriented, shorter in duration, there's not as much of a sense of duty to perform all the things that I just described. But I will say that I'm certainly more likely to pursue an additional relationship, a longer term relationship at new places with the folks that do everything they can to make that as fair and smooth a process. The one thing that I've learned that was the hardest thing, I would say, is that no matter how they do it, you're not there to let them know about how they could have done it better. In fact,
did you try that, Ian? But like, hey, let me give you a bit of feedback about how this.
No, I mean, I have had those experiences where earlier in my career where I was like, hey, you're really leaving me out in the cold here. It's rare that the person on the other side has any more room for empathy for you. And the less that you indicate your discomfort, the better it is for your future relationship. And being as your most gracious self has so many good reasons versus trying to teach somebody about how to do business, that as painful as it can be, that's the thing that I've taken away the most. And that I think that accounts for most business relationships, right? It's just, hey, when it ends, and like, let's be friends as best as we can from here. Which I make that point because it kind of contrasts with the point of stand up for your team and stand up for what's right in an agency. But I think it's one of those things like, when somebody says we're breaking up, we're broke up.
A great lesson to end on there, Ian. Often people are nervous during those conversations. They don't often do it. It's going to be fine. Just, as long as it's not a surprise and as long as you're doing your best and you're showing you're doing your best, it's okay. I've literally had conversations where the person has been, they've been laid off. The whole department's gone, right? Including all the suppliers. And there's obviously no notice and you're a creditor. You're out of luck. But they've handled it well. And we've gone on to work together again, even though that was a loss, right? Bad debt, no notice, sudden termination. But the person could do nothing else. And it was painful, but it was okay. And I've had the reverse where they clearly could pay the notice. They clearly could have told us and it came as a surprise and then they stiff you. Those people don't get forgotten and we never work with them again. So it can be handled with grace. And I think that's a great note to end on. So hopefully that was useful. This is a bit of a taboo topic, as we said at the beginning of the show, because it is emotional and it is personal, comes at that intersection of sort of commercial and personal, but you can handle it well and you can avoid it as well. So thanks, Chris. Thanks, Ian, for sharing some of the war stories here of agency life, but ones which are hard-earned and we're happy to share. If this was useful to you, please drop us a comment or follow us, and we will see you all again next week.